Jagged spires of twisted metal clawed at the sky, the wreckage of starships that once cast fear across sectors. Fires burned where plasma strikes had gutted troop carriers. Their carcasses now, nothing more than molten husks, leaking fumes. The acrid stench of ozone, fuel, and blood mixed in the heavy air, so thick it clung to the lungs. Lazira forced herself to breathe through the pain. Her armor was ruined. Its gleaming black plating cracked down the chest where a human's blade had struck true. One of her forearms hung limp, broken at the joint. Even kneeling, her form was imposing, tall, reptilian, crowned with mandibles that once commanded obedience with a single snap. She was Zalari, a captain, a conqueror whose name whispered like a curse in the war records of 3 empires. Yet here she was, out on her knees in the dirt of an alien world, her claws digging furrows into the ground, her body failing. The weight of defeat pressed on her shoulders heavier than her shattered armor. Before her stood the human. He was unlike the monsters of propaganda, though just as terrifying. The stories had painted humans as unkempt beasts, snarling savages, whose only joy was slaughter. But this one, he was steady, deliberate, his breath ragged, yet controlled. His blade, not some sophisticated plasma-laced weapon, but simple steel honed to a deadly edge, dripped with the dark ichor of her kin. His armor bore deep gouges and burns, proof of a battle survived against impossible odds. His eyes, though, were the worst.
Oh.
She had seen eyes like that before on predators just before they lunged. On commanders ordering orbital strikes, on warriors who stood knee-deep in corpses. But the human's gaze wasn't fire, wasn't cruelty. It was cold, cold enough to cut deeper than the blade he carried. Lazira's hearts thudded unevenly. She told herself she wasn't afraid. Fear was for the weak. She was Zalari raised. From birth in war, tempered in blood, forged in conquest. If death came here, then so be it. She would meet it upright, her mandibles bared, her spirit unbroken. She hissed, her voice sharp despite the tremor of exhaustion. Do it, human. End me. I will not beg. Her words echoed, lost in the crackle of burning wreckage. She expected a blade at her throat, a clean end. That was the way of war, the way of honor.
Oh.
Among her people, to slay a defeated enemy was no. Cruelty it was tradition. Mercy bred weakness. Weakness bred betrayal. The dead foe was the only trustworthy one. The human moved, its blade lifted, and for an instant she braced herself, coiling for one final surge of dignity. The mandibles clenched. Her remaining arms flexed, ready to lunge even if it meant dying faster. But the strike never came. Instead, he stopped. His grip loosened. The blade hung heavy at his side, blood dripping into the dirt. He did not speak, did not strike, did not grant her the end she expected. He only looked at her, breathing hard, sweat and soot streaking across his face. The silence was unbearable. Each heartbeat dragged like an eternity. Confusion struck her harder than any blow. Why is he waiting? Why doesn't he finish me? Her pride screamed at her to snarl, to provoke him, to demand the death that was rightfully hers. Yet some buried instinct warned her to be still. This human's hesitation wasn't weakness. It was something else, something more dangerous. A creature that fought without mercy was predictable, but one that could choose mercy. That was unknowable. That was terrifying. The valley was quiet now, unnaturally so. The thunder of cannons and the shriek of plasma had faded, leaving only the crackle of flames and the occasional groan of ruptured metal cooling in the night air. The silence pressed on Lazira like a vice, heavier than any blade at her throat. Training screamed at her. He is waiting to humiliate you, waiting to savor the fear. That was the way of conquerors. You break the enemy, not with their death, but with the anticipation of it. Yet the human did not sneer, did not boast, did not even seem to relish his victory. He only stood there, staring down at her as if lost. In thought, Lazira's mandibles clicked, betraying the nerves she swore she didn't feel. She wanted the killing blow to fall. At least then the uncertainty would end. A warrior's death was supposed to be swift an exclamation point at the end of a life of battle. This drawn-out silence felt wrong, twisted, crueler than execution itself. Finally the human moved. His voice broke the stillness, low and raw from exertion, yet unshakable. "You fought well." Lazira froze, and the words struck harder than any. Blade? Praise? From a human? From an enemy? Her kind did not compliment foes. They annihilated them, reducing them to ash. To speak admiration to one you were about to kill was unthinkable. Her mandibles spread in defiance, even as her body trembled. From pain. "What trick is this?" she hissed. "Do you think to break me with false honor? Kill me, human, and end your charade?" The human only shook his head. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his weapon. The blood-stained steel slipped from his grip and landed in the dirt beside her with a dull thud. The sound echoed in her skull.
Ow.
No warrior discards their weapon before an enemy, least of all before a captain of the Zhao Rai. And then, impossibly, he extended his hand. His palm open, his fingers curled only slightly, not in aggression but in offering. "Stand," he said. Just that single word. Then after a pause, "Live." The universe itself seemed to lurch at the statement. Lazira's heart hammered against her ribs. Live? He was offering her life. That was no victory. That was madness. Her mind scrambled for sense. Among the Xylari, mercy was not a virtue, but a disease. Sparing a foe invited betrayal. An enemy left alive would rise again. Stronger. Angrier. More dangerous. Gosh. Even their young were taught that to spare an opponent was to insult them, to strip them of honor. Better a clean death than the rod of pity. Yet here he was, offering her something no warrior of her kind would have dared. Take his hand, and she would be his prisoner. Shackled, humiliated, a symbol of weakness. Refuse, and she might provoke the blade she secretly longed for, the honorable death that still sang to her pride. But deep beneath the layers of pride and defiance, another voice whispered, a quiet alien thought that chilled her blood. This human is not like us. His strength isn't in killing, it's in choosing not to. The idea unsettled her more than anything else she had ever faced. To win a war by slaughter was expected. To win by sparing? That was a kind of power she could not measure. Her mandibles quivered, betraying hesitation. For the first time in her long career of war, she could not find words. She did not take his hand. Pride would not allow it. Yet neither did she spit on it, nor lash out, nor demand her death again. Instead, she remained frozen in that space, between choice and consequence. The warrior within her screamed for dignity. The survivor whispered of a path she had never considered. The human's hand did not waver. His gaze did not falter. He simply waited. And that waiting, that silence between blows tore at Lazira more viciously than any wound. She had braced for steel, for agony, for the swift release of death. What she found instead was uncertainty, mercy, and something she did not yet have the courage to name. The battlefield around them was still aflame. Corpses cooling in the dirt, the echoes of war still fresh in the air. And yet, in that moment, the war felt far away, smaller somehow. Compared to the weight of that outstretched hand, Lazira's claws dug into the soil. She hated herself for trembling. She hated him more for offering her something she didn't understand. Lazira expected torment. That was how her people treated captives, and she assumed humans predators by nature would be worse. She imagined cages drenched in filth, jeering guards, whips that tore scales from flesh. That was what she braced. For when the human soldiers dragged her, still reeling from battle, back to their encampment, but what she found defied every expectation. The humans bound her. Yes, thick restraints across her wrists, ankles, and even her mandibles. They weren't fools. The Zalari captain was as dangerous chained as she was armed, yet they did not gloat. They did not strike her when she stumbled. She bled. One even pressed cloth to the wound to slow the flow. It was unsettling. Camp itself was organized chaos. Humans moved with efficiency, but also with something else: comradeship. They laughed in small groups despite their exhaustion, shared food in dented metal tins, and clasped each other's shoulders with gestures of reassurance. Lazira found herself staring, her warrior's mind trying to decipher the strange rituals. Among her kind, soldiers only laughed after victory celebrations drenched in blood and fire. Here, laughter seemed to serve another purpose. A bomb, perhaps? A reminder that they were alive. And then there was Himtha, one who had spared her. Marcus, she learned his name was a simple sound, human in its bluntness, but it carried weight in the camp. Soldiers deferred to him not out of fear, but respect. He was not the highest in rank, she realized, but still his voice carried authority when he spoke. He visited her often. Always unarmed, always calm. He never spoke with the arrogance of a victor or the cruelty of a captor. Instead, he asked questions. What do the Xylari fight for? What do your people believe honor means? Do you ever grow tired of war? She refused to answer at first. Silence was her defiance. To speak was to give him something, to risk yielding ground. Marcus never pressed, never raised. His voice, he simply sat with her in the tent where they kept her under watch, letting the silence stretch until it felt less like a battle of wills and more like patience. The strange part was the way the humans treated her wounds. They did not let her suffer untreated. Their medics, with steady hands and tools far cruder than Xylari regeneration pods, cleaned the gashes across her chest. They wrapped her broken arm in rigid splints, and when the fever came, they sat by her side until it broke. Lazira hated every moment of it, hated the humiliation of being cared for by enemies. But deeper than the hate was confusion. Why would they bother? A weakened prisoner was easier to control. Why keep her strong? One evening, with firelight flickering through the canvas walls of her tent, she could no longer contain the question gnawing at her insides. Why? She rasped. Her throat was raw, her pride thinner still. Why did you not end me? Of my people would have. A clean strike, an honorable death. But you, her mandibles clicked in frustration. You humiliate me with life. Marcus studied her, silent for a moment. The flames outside cast shifting light across his scarred face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, because I've buried enough soldiers, yours, mine, too many. Killing you wouldn't end the war, it would just add another name to the fire. Mandibles tightened. Mercy is weakness. You know this. One day I may rise again and kill you. He didn't flinch. Maybe, but mercy doesn't weaken us. It reminds us who we are. If we kill until we forget that, his gaze hardened, colder than steel, then we've already lost. The words struck deeper than she expected. She tried to scoff, tried to dismiss them as human delusion. But the conviction in his tone unsettled her. In the Xylari creed, strength came from dominance, from proving superiority through blood. But here sat a human who believed strength came from restraint, from choosing not to strike, and the most disorienting part. She found herself respecting it. Lazira had been raised to see the universe as a predator's game, strong consumed. The weak had only themselves to blame. That belief was the foundation of Xylari culture, etched into her bones, since hatchlinghood. It had never been questioned, never doubted, till now. Days bled into weeks within the human camp, and each day tested her convictions. At first she watched for cracks in their facade. Surely, their so-called mercy was a trick, a way to break her before extracting secrets. Surely, they would show their true nature soon enough. The cruelty she had always believed defined them. But the cracks never came. Instead, she observed something stranger than cruelty. Humans mourned. When one of their soldiers died of wounds, the others gathered, heads bowed, voices rising in unison as they sang. Not songs of conquest or triumph, songs of grief.
All songs that carried sorrow.
Like a current through the camp. They shared memories of the fallen, laughing at stories, weeping at others. Death was not an end to them, but a wound they carried together. The Xylari did not mourn. Their dead were discarded as failures, remembered only for the victories they had secured in life. To show grief was weakness. Watching humans openly weep unsettled Lazira. What unsettled her more was the strength it seemed to give them afterward. as though the morning had bound them tighter instead of loosening their resolve. She also noticed how they treated their wounded. No one was left behind, no one discarded. Soldiers missing limbs were carried on the backs of their comrades. Those too weak to move were fed by hand. Lazira could hardly fathom it. Among her kind, an injured warrior unable to fight was abandoned, consumed by carrion beasts or enemy. Fire. Mercy wasted resources. Yet here, mercy was as natural as breathing. And then there was Marcus. He continued to visit her. Sometimes he asked questions. Sometimes he sparred with her in mock combat, using blunted training weapons to test her reflexes. Sometimes he simply sat in silence, watching the stars with her. He was infuriatingly patient, infuriatingly calm. One evening, when the sky above shimmered with alien constellations unfamiliar to her, Marcus joined her at the edge of the camp. She had been staring upward for hours, trying to decipher her place. "In this strange new world, you look like someone carrying a war inside," he said. His voice was softer than usual, stripped of the battlefield's steel. She startled at the words, her mandibles twitching. "I am," she admitted, surprising herself. "All I was taught crumbles in your presence. Everything about you contradicts the truth I was raised with." Marcus tilted his head. And what truth was that? That mercy is weakness. Compassion is a flaw, that honor comes only through blood. She glanced at him, eyes narrowing. "Yet you live by the opposite, and you are not weak. You should be easy prey, but you are not. You confuse me, human." He didn't smile, though she half expected him to. Instead, he looked at the stars as if weighing their light. "War, Lazira. It teaches us to hate, to destroy, to see the world in terms of strong and weak. Mercy," he exhaled. "Mercy teaches us to unlearn that." His words burrowed under her scales like acid. She wanted to reject them, to spit back the creed of her people, but the evidence surrounded her. Mercy hadn't weakened these humans. It had made them stronger, bound them together like iron chains. No enemy could sever. And, most disturbing of all, she realized she did not hate Marcus. She tried stars. How she tried, but the more time she spent in his presence, the more she felt something alien in her hearts. Respect. That night alone. In her tent, Lazira pressed her claws into the dirt floor until it bled. She whispered the warrior's creed to herself over and over, as if repetition could rebuild the walls crumbling inside her. Strength is dominance. Mercy is weakness. The weaker prey. The strong survive, but the creed no longer rang true. Marcus's words echoed louder. "If we kill until we forget who we are, we've already lost." And for the first time in her long life as a captain of the Zaylari, Lazira feared that perhaps her people had already lost not to human weapons, but to something far more dangerous. The day of the exchange arrived. Dawn broke over the valley in pale hues, sunlight cutting through the smoke that had long lingered from battle. The humans had gathered their prisoners of war, preparing to trade them with the Zaylari command at a neutral ground. Lazira stood among them, her restraint still secure, but her mind far less certain than the day she had fallen to her knees before Marcus's blade. She had expected to be broken in captivity, to be humiliated or erased. Instead, she had been preserved, fed, treated, and spoken to, as if her life had meaning beyond war. Marcus's words haunted her still, a weight heavier than chains. Mercy doesn't weaken us. Make sure we don't become what we're fighting against. Now, as the convoy moved across the barren terrain, Lazira felt a strange hollowness in her chest. She should have been eager to return to her people, to once again command, to prove that captivity had not softened her. Yet the thought of leaving this camp, of leaving him, stirred an unease she could not name. The neutral ground was a flat plain marked by banners of both factions, a fragile truce held together by mutual exhaustion. Zaylari soldiers stood waiting, their armor polished, their posture rigid. To them, she would be a symbol proof that their captains endured. The humans unshackled her restraints when they reached the exchange point. Lazira flexed her arms, free for the first time in weeks. She should have stepped forward immediately, head high, eager to rejoin her kin. But her gaze locked instead on Marcus, who stood in full armor, his face shadowed beneath a visor lifted. Just enough for her to see his eyes, steady, watchful, unyielding. Her mandibles twitched. 1,000 words fought for release, words of defiance, of gratitude, of fury. None came. Finally, she forced herself to speak, her voice tight with the effort. I do not understand you, human. You could have ended me. You should have ended me. Instead, you gave me life. Why? Marcus met her stare without hesitation. He didn't offer a speech, didn't raise his voice for all to hear. He simply answered, his words meant for her alone. Because one day, someone has to end the cycle. The plain seemed to fall silent. The banners, the soldiers, the waiting commanders all faded to nothing around that single sentence. Lazira's hearts thudded painfully. The Zalari lived by cycles of vengeance. Empires rose and fell in blood, victories avenged, defeats repaid in kind. It was the rhythm of her people's history, as natural as breathing. To reject that cycle was to reject her very identity. Yet here stood a human who had not only rejected it, he had done so with conviction, as if it were the simplest truth in the galaxy. Her throat tightened. She wanted to lash out, to call him naive, weak, a fool who didn't understand the reality of power. But when she looked at him, she could not, because Marcus had shown strength in sparing her. Strength not born of fear or dominance, but of choice. And choice, she realized, was a weapon far deadlier than any blade. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Her mandibles quivered, her lungs strained, but language failed her. What? Could she say that he had broken her? That his mercy was more terrifying than his sword? That against her will, she respected him? Nothing left her lips. She was left standing there, silent, while her soldiers reclaimed her and the humans stepped back. As they led her away, she cast one last look over her shoulder. Marcus did not wave, did not follow. He only stood where he was, watching her go, his eyes calm as if he already knew the war was no longer the same. For Lazira, the battlefield had shifted. Victory and defeat no longer carried the same meaning. Her people believed war was eternal, that only blood could shape the future. Yet in one moment, one human had cracked that certainty apart. Not with death, but with mercy, she had braced for death at his hands. She had expected the cold finality of a warrior's end. What she had received instead left her speechless, and somewhere deep inside, she feared that silence would echo for the rest of her life.